Hi, I am Harsha Wijayawardhana. I want to take you through a journey through time, searching for the zero, for, for zero, a symbol for zero. On the left-hand side of my introduction slide of the presentation, you will see a pocket watch given to our King Rajadhiraja Singh in the latter part of 1700s by the Dutch. And this particular watch, basically, though it looks very similar to modern pocket watch or pocket watches, it has a 60 Sinhala horas in a Sinhala ilakkam or Sinhala numerals. So I will take you through a beautiful journey, which will start somewhere in the fourth century BCE to the modern day, and where that we will actually look at the first earliest zeros that we have found in somewhere in Southeast Asia and in India, and then in Sri Lanka. A lot of people think that Sri Lanka did not have a zero, a symbol for zero, a representation for zero, but we had. And that zero is going to be, this zero is a unique zero, and which that I would like to present to you. Okay, so what we are seeing now is a modern Hindu Arabic numerals on the top part of it. And the second, and below that, you have the Arabic, where the numerals, which we call the Hindu Arabic numerals in the Eastern Hindu Arabic numerals, which is used by the Arabic countries today. So where that you have a zero, and it has a dot. And the next one I want to show you is there are only two civilizations in the world that had known about zero. One is the Mayans, and the other one is the Indian civilization. The Mayans, of course, used a kind of a zero which looks like a shell. And obviously, they didn't count in 10, they count in base 20. So this is a vigesimal numeral system. Well, we don't know though whether they had used the zero as a number. But what we know is that they had the zero, and it was a very important position. It was an important part of their numeral system. But in our system, the Hindu Arabic system, we have operations and as a number as well, right? Operations in the sense we divide, we can multiply, and all that operations that we have defined. 1 divided by 0 is an infinity, undefined, and it is a plus or minus infinity. And then those days, long time back, when Brahmagupta's time, well, there was an undefined 1 divided by 0 was 0. They called it. He called it in his Brahmagupta Siddhanta. So today, 0 is a number. It's a key number without which that we can't, today we can't have our computers working. So our contemporary computer science owes its existence to the binary system, base 2. It's a digit 0 and 1. By the way, this is the radix that we use. We know exactly the extreme right is a 0 index, and it goes up to 9. The next one is index 1. It goes up to, again, 9, but the together we know is 25. We can go to the next one, that is down by 100. Next one is 1000. This is what we call radix. Radix is here is 10. Babylonians used positional notation, or what we call a place value in number writing, which they inherited from the Assyrians, and the Babylonians were skilled astronomers also. Today, what we use, Western astrology, came from Babylonia. And they used base 60 numeral system. That's why today we have 60 degrees, 60 minutes, and all are in 60, 360 for 60 for a circle, 360 degrees. That's again not because of anything, because of the Babylonians. And also the calendar, Babylonian calendar had a 360 days. So it was a 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and 1 hour for then 60 hours, perhaps for a day, like what we had done in Sri Lanka. So in Sri Lanka, we had a 60 horas. That is called Sinhala horas, or the horas or Sinhala pair, which means 60 hours in Sinhala, the Sinhala hours. The day started not at the midnight, but it started in the morning at the sunrise. And until the next sunrise is the 60 hours. So that pocket watch that you saw had 60 Sinhala hours. Babylonians are credited with a placeholder sign for 0 in medial position. That is not on the extreme right. So they did not use it as a number, right? So the Babylonians used cuneiform for writing. So this is the numbering system they had used. So the cuneiform clay tablets are found today even in Babylonia. So if you, all the writing is cuneiform. Even the old Persian is in cuneiform. So if you look at, these are the numbers, numeral system that the Babylonians used, and the symbols, and that is in the cuneiform. So what is the earliest known ancient zeros that we have, what we know of? Historians have identified 2 main shapes as symbols for the number 0 in early numerals. A dot, which you had seen in the Arabic, in the numeral system, Hindu-Arabic numeral system, which the Arabs use in some of the Arab countries today. A dot. And the other one is an oval-shaped or circular-shaped 0, which is used in modern Hindu-Arabic numerals. However, Sri Lankans also had a 0, and that's what we call a Sinhala 0, documented in Sri Lanka, and it has a different shape. Sinhala 0 is a halkirim or halant, or halanta as we call it, a vertical line next to or attached to a numeral. So as I mentioned before, the Babylonians' writing system is known on clay tablet as cuneiform, and the Babylonians use a positional notation of place value in number writing, which they inherited from the Assyrians. Okay, so what is the earliest known 0? That's what we know. Actually, the earliest known 0, well, some people say that it was in India, which is called Bakshari 0. That is a polar leaf book, which they had found in India, and apparently it goes back to the 3rd century CE, Common Era. Well, but there was a problem. When they did the carbon dating, that found out to be between 3rd century and the 8th century. That was written in Sharda. Sharda is a North Indian script, and that became later on to Gupta script. Okay, but let us look at what we know of. Exactly what we know is the earliest known 0, but it didn't come from India. It came from Kama. So we call it a Kama stela, which is identified the older zero by Dr. Amir Axel in his book Finding Zero. This teller depicts the Shaka year 605, that is 683 CE. By that time, Brahmagupta, who was in India, actually had come up with the operations for zero, operations on zero, basically. So the operations by zero and operations on zero. So this, here you have what you see right now on in the image on the right hand side at the bottom of the image, right hand bottom of the image, bottom right hand, that you will see 605. There is a dot in the middle, so that is 605. Later on, let me show you something very interesting, that what happened in Sri Lanka, and the Sri Lankan two numerals 6 and 5, they look very similar to what you see on the picture right now, in the picture right now. The second one is also came from second one, which within 2 years apart, well, 1 year apart, that is 606 Shaka year. The earlier one is 605. This one is 606, but it came from Sri Vijaya Kingdom, which is also not far from Khmer, that is in right now the present day Indonesia. And that's very similar to what the KF127, which is a dot, and this also a dot. And it's about that stone tablet contains the establishment of Sri Kshetra Park, commissioned by King Sri Jayansha, the founder of the Sri Vijaya Kingdom. Now, the interesting part of that is although it's a 1 year apart, this later, this is a dot also, later that you find the oval shape or the round shape zero in the same area. Now, Sri Vijaya and Khmer, both the inscriptions that you find, and the first one is in Sanskrit and Khmer. This one is also in Sanskrit. Now, here is the next one, third one. The inscription was named after the village where it was found, Kotakapur, and the inscription written in Old Malay was in Pallava Grantha script. George Porteous, the French archaeologist, noted that the Kotakapur inscription, like the one in Talangtuo, belonged to Sri Vijaya Kingdom, a Buddhist kingdom, which is actually a Mahayana Buddhist kingdom. The inscription records an invasion that was taken by the Sri Vijaya Kingdom against the island of Java in Shaka year 608. So you can see the 6 on the left, which is a very common, but then you have an oval-shaped 0 and a number 8. Okay, let me take you to India for it. This is the Bakshali 0 that I was talking about. This is supposed to be in the 3rd century CE, carbon dated to the 3rd and the 8th centuries CE. So we have a little bit of a dispute whether this actually came from the 3rd century. My idea is, we know that what we do in Sri Lanka when we have ola leaves, and most likely this was copied from after many years, it was copied again, and is a copied 1-to-1 copies, and therefore this actually 0 would have been there in the 3rd century. This is the oldest verifiable 0 that we find on a wall in India. This was called a Chaturbuja temple in Gwalior Fort, inscribed on the wall. The inscription features 2 circular oval-shaped zeros to represent the number 270 and 50, which resemble the zeros commonly used in modern times. So we call this a Gwalior 0. So the Gwalior 0 is actually the ancestor to our modern-day Indo-Arabic 0. So let me take you to Sri Lanka. Now, what happened in Sri Lanka? Sri Lanka had Sinhala Ilakam. Now, this is a very interesting set of Ilakam, or the numerals that we find in at the time of Sri Lanka losing its independence to the British. So there is evidence that the royal court had used the Sinhala Ilakam for royal edicts and the proclamations. The first Bible in Sinhala during the Dutch occupation of the maritime provinces of Sri Lanka uses Sinhala Ilakkam to write the publication year and for the page numbering. So what you see here on the left-hand side is actually from a book, grammar book, that was published by the Mudliya Mendis Gunasekara in somewhere in 1891. And so that is how the Western world got to know about the Sinhala Ilakkam. So what you see on the right-hand side of that is the convention that the British signed with the Sinhala noblemen, handing over the Kandyan kingdom to the British. There were 11 clauses, and those are in Sinhala Ilakkam on the right-hand side, and the left-hand side you have is the Indo-Arabic numerals. Now the next one is a very interesting one. This is how that you write Sinhala Ilakkam, how you write the numbers. Okay, so this is actually very similar to Brahmi numerals, which actually the ancestor to all our numerals in this part of the region. In South India and Southeast Asia, where the Pallava Grantha, the numerals that the Pallavas used also came from Brahmi. Now, on the left-hand side, what you are seeing is how you write 12. So you have a sign for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and 90, and 100. And then again, we have another the symbol representing 1,000. So what you have here is we have 10 plus 2. So you have what we call a 12. So this is an additive system. So the Brahmi, when it came to Sri Lanka from India, somewhere around 3rd century BC, or maybe even earlier, of 4th century. So we have evidence that the Sri Lankans were writing, they had used Brahmi script. So they would have used the Brahmi numerals as well. It was an additive system. So what you are seeing right now is actually the first part of it is an additive. The second part, you will see the multiplication comes in. The multiplication, you will later find out that the Brahmi develops into what we call a multiplicative and additive system somewhere in between 1st and the 3rd century CE in Sri Lanka. So whether it's a local thing or not, we are not very sure. But I have tried to find evidence in India, but that happens after the 4th century CE onwards. In Sri Lanka, this happened in somewhere between 1st and the 3rd century. In Sri Lanka, we have sufficient evidence to prove that. Now you can see the 4th one here, which is 255. You have a 2 times 100 times, plus 50 plus 5, 255. The next one is beautiful numerals, which has a 2 times 1,000 plus 20 plus 5, 2025. So again, that watch, the pocket watch, for you to look at. Now I come to another very interesting set of numerals. Well, one day somebody asked me, did Sinhala people have a 0? Well, did you have it? Did it have the operations on 0? Did you treat as a number, 0 as a number? Very important 3 questions. So the first question comes from here. Lith Ilakkam, what do we call? These are, I called it astrological digits when we encoded in the Unicode. Why astrological digits? The reason behind that is these digits are used for calculating horoscopes in Sri Lanka. Most other horoscopes written somewhere in about 200 to 300 years those are actually in these digits. We know that it was calculated using these digits. There is a 0 for this for this set of numerals. So the planetary positions, when you write 10, there is a 1 and 0. So there is a 1 and a 0. 20, 2 and a 0. 200, of course, with the two zeros, with a 2 on the leftmost position. What I saw was another very interesting part. When we went, we went to Sigiriya on a trip. And Sigiriya Museum had, well, about 10 to 15 bricks. They were prefabricated bricks. They were found in the Manikdena Stupa in Damulla, in somewhere central part of Sri Lanka. And that particular stupa, there was inside this particular stupa, there was we had the relic chamber, and that was actually built using prefabricated bricks. And these bricks were numbered. That means they're prefabricated in the sense they were built before they were brought to the site to assemble them. So these prefabricated bricks were numbered, and they were numbered. First, earlier, I thought they were characters. When I looked very carefully, I saw the numbers. Very unique numbering system that we found in Sri Lanka. It's a Littilaka, astrological digits. And those digits, you had the 0, which is the Halat. Halkirim. There is a reason behind that is. Halkirima is used as a linguistic 0 in our script. Our script, Sinhala script, and also most of the Indic scripts are very mathematical. It's a mathematical notations to show how to pronounce or how to have our phonemes, how to pronounce phonetically a word. In our Halanta, Hallakuna is a linguistic 0. As Panini actually pointed out, what we call a lopa somewhere in 4th century BCE. So they had come, and one of the unknown monks in Sri Lanka had used it in our script during the 4th century CE. By 4th century, we were using Halanta. By 8th century, it was very popular. So we had 3 different kinds of linguistic 0s. One is called Anushwarya, which we call it a Bindua. And we write not on top of a character, but at the right-hand side, like in Telugu. Telugu does the same. So it is also, they call it Shunya. Shunya means 0. By the way, 0, the present 0, actually comes from the word Shunya. It's from Sanskrit. We call it a Bindua. Bindua is a dot in Sinhala. And also in Hindi, Bindua. Bindua we call it Bindua for Anushwarya also. And we didn't use oval shape 0 on in our writing because of Anushwarya. Anushwarya is also a linguistic 0. Like we say Sinhala, sound comes from Anushwarya. Then there is another one. It's called a Visarga. Visarga is also, that's called in Telugu Arashunya, which is like a half shunya, half 0. And for us also, it makes a sound, sound, sound. It just ends with a sound. So we have 3 different linguistic 0s, but the last to come is Halant. Halant is actually removes the inherent vowel in our consonants. Like K, there is an inherent K sound. All Abhiguda scripts have an inherent K sound. How do you remove it? With a virama. Viramo halant in our case. So litilakam. This is a very interesting set of numerals. You can see halkirima. Actually, shape of the halkirima is also a beautiful thing. How do we draw the halkirima? So from the base of a letter, of a character, we take it up and then go to the cursively onto the left, crosses the vertical shaft, or maybe it's curved, and to the other side with a half circle. Actually, that's a circle which half one side on the left and the half on the right. It is 0. Then you have 1, 2, beautifully cursive letters, 7, and some of them look letters, but they are not letters. They basically echo the letters later on. I have taken from the Ola Leaf books the old the Litilakam for you to see. You can see like normal Indo-Arabic numerals. You write 11, 12, 13. So this is in the Manikdana. We have not shown you the 10 because we have to make a carbon dated right now. So it's scientifically to establish this belongs to the 4th century. Of course, when you look at the letters, they are 4th century. You will see the Brahmi kind of 8 and a 1 on the side, because the 1 in Brahmi is the horizontal line. It became cursive somewhere around 2nd, 3rd century, and then later on became like a kombu or the front vowel, that modifier that we use today. So here you have a 1. So let us take you to something very interesting. That is a Brahmi numeral evolution in Sri Lanka. Brahmi numeral evolution is something that we have not actually documented in Sri Lanka. Until today, we have not talked about. But anyway, I like to actually show you something very interesting. Brahmi numeral evolved from additive system to multiplicative and additive system in Sri Lanka. Today, if you look at Tamil numerals, it is also multiplicative and additive system. But there's a little slightly different thing about it. It has a symbol for 10. It has a symbol for 100, symbol representing 100. Then you have 1,000. How do you write? You have a multiplication like this is Sinhala Ilakam, but then you have to show the rest of it with the other two signs, like the tens up to 100. Then if you have 200s, 2 times basically 100, 2 times 100, 200, and then something about whether they are additive system. But they have to use only 2 symbols, 100 and 1,000 and a 10, 3 basically. Well, interesting part is this. Almost all the forms of Brahmi numerals that found in Sri Lanka resemble those found in India, except for 10. We have not seen 1 also. We think that we have 1 in Sri Lanka. We have not found. We think that we have found 10. It's not basically a 10 in Brahmi symbol representing 10 in Brahmi in India is actually a horizontal, something like a kind of a how would I say, infinity sign open on the right hand side. It's a horizontally there, but we don't have it in Sri Lanka. That actually has a vertically. In Tonigala, we have seen it as a vertical Tonigala inscription. We actually guess it's a 10. Well, the problem is very interesting. Why it's vertical? When you write on Ola, it rips. So that's why we don't have a horizontal signs, horizontal symbols on Ola leaf, and it just rips. A dot, when you put a dot on there, it actually goes through the Ola leaf. So the interesting other parts are very nice to actually think about. Like for instance, in Tamil, Pulli had been introduced in the 2nd century. Pulli is a dot on top of to make it a pure consonant. Like the Virama, it's actually a Virama in Tamil. like the virama we have, is a halant, basically removes the inherent vowel. So you put a dot. But ironically, from 2nd century onwards, utensils change. We had what we call what we write. The writing utensils have changed. And what had happened because of that, a pointed, the 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 basically the instruments what we have changed. What they did was that it basically removed, I mean, it was not used. The dot was not used for many years to come until the printing came later in somewhere around 1700s. So what you have here is how the Brahmi numerals went from, this is actually, I got it from Brigadier Siri Munisingha's site, and he has done a very nice job pointing out all the big inscription, Situlpavu inscription, where some of the numerals were highlighted and taken out. What you see here is somewhere in the 1st century CE. So between the 1st century BCE to 1st century CE, we see a lot of, long inscriptions that use the 1st century CE. And what you see here is a very interesting. We have three different signs, 10, 100 and 1000. They look very local, they are localized. Some of them look like Indian, but they would have treated them as basically as characters. So therefore, you will have the ligatures. For instance, there is another very interesting thing about it. There are two signs, or there is a sign called Karisa or Karihi. And normally, it's about basically the area to denote the area. But here, the Sinhala people had used it's a very ingenuine way. They have used this to actually separate in the additive system to show that column, that means the column headers, which later on, when you decide on the radix of a particular number, which is a 10-base system, the index 0 would be 0 to 9. The second index 1 to be 0 to 9 again, but again, that will together, it has a 1 means 10. The next one is, 100. The third one is 1000. Likewise, the column actually tells you the first part of this with a Karisa sign as separator. It tells you basically what the multiples of what, or the additive of what. For instance, the extreme right, it will not have a header. If it is on the left-hand side, whether it's 100 or 1000, multiplication of what? Other one is additive of what? So let us look at it. The first one, but these are like, they have treated initially, they have treated as an additive system. They have treated as a characters, and you have ligatures here. So the ligatures are when you treat them as characters, or like for instance, or conjunct letters. If you look at, there is a Karisa on the left-hand side, and the right-hand side, it tells you what number is. Now, for instance, extreme left on the extreme top left, you have a 50. Extreme, that is the symbol for, on the right-hand side is the 50 sign of the Brahmi numeral, and the left-hand side, what you have is a Karisa or the Karihi sign. That gives you the extent of the land, basically. It's about 4 acres separately. The next one, the second one is a 30. Again, the left-hand side, left-hand side, it's a Karihi, and then the third symbol for 30. The 400 here is actually ligature. You will see the Karihi one, then you see basically the 400 sign with there is a 100, then plus there are 3. So likewise, you will see, and there's a beautiful one is a 200. It's actually a ligature. then you have 100, then there is a nice one. There are 4,000s. It tells you 4,000. Then again the Karihi sign. Then there is a 70. Then the bottom one, you will see the 100 sign, the second one. And it tells you how many hundreds. 100. Then there is a bottom, you have additive system, a 70. So all add them together, you have a 4,470. So the interesting one is there are 4,000, you have a 4,000s, you have put it in there. Now let us go to the next one. On the left-hand side, you have a 603. That is a Karisa or Karihi. Then you have, there is, that you will see is the 100 sign. That's a column head. So we don't now write, we know the index 1 is actually 100. We'll go up to 100. So that's exactly what they have done. They have put a column head. And the next one, you have 6, which means a multiplication. Now this comes from Dakina Stupa, 1st century, 2nd century onwards. Basically, it's a 17 slabs. And this comes later. Now, the interesting one is Karisa sign of the separates, and then you have 3. Now you add together 603. On the Bakiala inscription, which you are seeing on the right-hand side, this is the first time by the 1st century onwards, we see the 700 written with a Kari sign 107, 700. So that's the first time. This is again Dakina Stupa, somewhere around 3rd century. So this is another Karihi. You can see 100 times 9, and you have 4, 904. Then you have 420 here, the bottom one. Likewise, there are so many which I can show you from 2nd, 3rd century up to 400. That is an evolution of the positional notation. We are slowly moving towards in Sri Lanka, towards what we call a multiplicative and additive system, but it's moving further. This actually, the column heads, and if you put zeros in between, let's say 904, instead of 900, now third, the index will be third in second index. And if you know what that header means, we know it's 1,000 up maximum you can go. 100, I mean, you can go. And then if you put a 9 there without telling it's 100, we know it's a 900. Then the 0 must come to the next one because there is nothing in running up to 99. So there is no 1 to 9 is 0. But then the extreme right, you can have 4. So that's what we have done with this one. We don't have to have the, so it would have evolved slowly with this to a what we call a decimal system, which we start seeing in somewhere in 4th century CE. And this is what the Indians actually have done. So Indians is an additive system. Later on, Gupta numerals, you will see this multiplicative and additive system. That's something after 3rd century BC, CE. So what it means is Sri Lanka had an earlier start. Sri Lanka also had an earlier start for Anushwarya and Visargya. So something unusual. That means a localization. But also we have used decimals, though that we are yet to establish what we saw in Manigdana, what we have seen, the evidence we have, we can actually proudly say that the 0 came into existence somewhere in 4th century with a proper positional notation. Now the second question, did we have operations? Yes, we did. When it came to the in the Pujavali, which I will cover in my next presentation, where that the big numbers were handled and also the operations are also there. So the Brahmagupta in 628, he would write what we call Brahmagupta Siddhanta. So Brahmagupta Siddhanta, in India, he would write what we call today, what we know of the operations of, so which will go to the West through the Al-Khazmi of the, because he an Arab who would actually take it to the West. Now the interesting part. So on the left-hand side, you will see this camel stela that we talked about, or the Thai, Lao, and Myanmar, which I will also in the next presentation will cover our operations in our script, zero operations, linguistic zero, and so many other things. But I will tell you something interesting story here. On the left-hand side, on the right, what you see the 605 camel stela in the 7th century. What you see is the 605. So I wrote this in the Litilaka. And with the Halanta in the middle, you will see a very similar symbols. Then you have in the Mendis Gunasekara, in his book called Grantavya, in a magazine called Grantavya, he talks about Litilaka. He says, please, some write, instead of Halanta, they will write, or the Halant, or Halkirima with a modern zero, or even a dot. So there he had known about it. In the Puja Avaliya, they talk about Bindua. Bindua being a very common thing. Shunya versus Bindua. Shunya for devoid, or emptiness, but you will have a zero. For zero, the author had used Bindua. That means Bindua had been there. They had used a dot. They would have used Halanta. They would have used oval shape, valley a zero, or a dot. Most likely it was a dot. Lithilatam astrology disease found in Sri Lanka during the Kandyan have an uncanny resemblance to Thai and Khmer numerals. You can see now some of these Khmer numerals are no longer there. That actually now become a Thai later on. So what you will see. So the story that we will now trace at the end of in the next presentation is about how zero came into existence. There was an interesting thing about Nagarjuna, Mahayana Buddhism, which Abhayagiriya and Jetavane actually basically we had Mahayana Buddhism in Sri Lanka. So we will talk about in the next presentation. And thank you very much for listening to me. So the next presentation that I will be talking about is zero operations using linguistic zero in Sinhala script. Please write to me, Wijayawardhana@gmail.com. Thank you.